Hello and welcome to Davenant Hall Faculty Spotlight. I'm Nathan Johnson, the Provost of Davenant Hall. Today I have joining me Dr. Michael Lynch, who is a teaching fellow at the Davenant Institute and a professor at Davenant Hall. Dr. Michael Lynch, welcome to Davenant Hall Faculty Spotlight.
Thank you for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Davenant Hall.
Yeah, I've been teaching pretty much since the beginning. Indeed, Brad can fact check this later, but I think I am the one who suggested Davenant Hall at the very beginning at a pub in Annapolis, which we just were at this past week. We met up and reminisced about that time. So anyways, so I've been teaching there since pretty much the start, and I really enjoyed teaching for Davenant Hall.
So we have you to thank for where we are today.
I mean, again, you can check with Brad, but Davenant Hall wouldn't exist without me probably. Yeah, that's what I'm going to go with.
We'll stick with that. So how did you kind of get to where you are today with your research and your teaching?
So I went to a public high school in Texas. Then I got I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, in Southern Baptist churches, rather, I guess they're Congregationalists, so there's no church, it's just churches. Anyways, I was going to go into meteorology and decided that I wanted to study Bible instead. And I found out that the Moody Bible Institute was free. So I applied there. I went to the Moody Bible Institute. I studied historical theology, which is suggestive of the sorts of things that I was interested in even back then. I grew up around high school or later high school. Matt Chandler came to Dallas. And so I grew up in that young, restless, and reformed sort of thing. Tons of Piper. Matt Chandler, my first systematic theology was handed to me for free by Matt Chandler. It was Grudem, his systematic theology, and I was just in awe of this thing. So anyways, I mean, I remember as like a freshman in college getting this thing and being like, I'm in heaven. So yeah, I did historical theology during my time in undergrad. I became a Paedo-Baptist. I started attending an OPC church in the Chicago area, got married, stayed at that church, then decided that all that time I was thinking about the ministry. So I go get my MDiv in Jackson, Mississippi, at RTS. I'm still really interested in historical theology, but I do kind of biblical exegesis and biblical language stuff like emphasis while I was there, because I knew that if I were going to go in the ministry, I would need those. And so I wanted to kind of center on that. And while I was there, I had an internship at a church, and I liked the preaching, but I didn't like doing some of the other things related to pastoral ministry, like, going to the hospital and stuff. So I decided that's not what I want to do. I really want to pursue just academic stuff. I really like to teach. I still like preaching. I don't really do it anymore, but I liked all of that. So instead, talking with some of my professors at RTS, they encouraged me to look at PhD programs. I chose Calvin because I wanted to study under Muller. I did my PhD in historical theology, or history of Christianity is what it actually is, but no one cares about that. But it on John Davenant. Then I published my dissertation and worked for the Davenant Hall, and that's what I do. I'm really interested in early modern theology, Roman Catholic and Protestant, both of it, everything, just all of it.
Well, talk to us more about the early modern period and what makes early modern theology so fascinating and something that particularly needs to be studied more in our time.
Well, we get all of the Protestant confessions basically come from that period. So it's the period of confessionalization. So I mean, if you care about the Westminster Confession of Faith, you should care about the early modern period because that's when that thing was written, right? If you confess the 39 Articles, same thing. If you confess the London Baptist Confession of Faith as 1689, right? Like all of these things were published in this particular era, right? Heidelberg Catechism, right? 1500, 1600, sorry, 16th, 17th century. So that alone seems to, if we've decided as churches not to change our confessions, but rather stick to those, there's probably a reason for that. It's probably because we deem them to be still sufficient, which is something about the theologizing of the period. Perhaps there's also a belief that we could probably not do as good of a job, which I totally believe is true. So I think what makes the early modern period unique is that it is both modern, things are changing, right? Medieval ways of life and urbanization has really ramped up, right? So it's kind of like our world. But the old way of educating is still there. Kind of this where everyone's reading these certain books as opposed to reading all sorts of other things. You can still be a generalist, right? So you can study law, but be very proficient and keep up in theology and in politics at the same time, right? So you can be a lawyer, but still write theology, or you could be a theologian and write law and politics and these sorts of things. Those days are over, right? You no longer find people who are really, really, really proficient in multiple disciplines that far removed from each other, of course, right? I mean, of course, you can find a scientist that might do like some physics and biology at the same time, right? Whatever. But by and large, two kind of independent fields and being able to work in those areas is something that you could still do because there was just a limited amount of resources that you had to master. And there was a common scholastic vocabulary that worked right? Everyone was taught the same logic, generally speaking. Everyone was taught the same metaphysics, generally speaking, right? And so on and so forth. And so you had this common language. And of course, literally a common language, not just terminology, but language itself, like Latin, right? So that, someone in England who speaks English as their first language can still talk with someone in France who speaks French but does not speak English. They can still have a conversation just fine. Not unlike the way that English plays today, actually, in our society, right? I can go to China and Japan and all these other places, and I can find English speakers, right? So anyways, I suppose I've covered some reasons that I think make the early modern period uniquely interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in a lot of seminaries, theological schools, the curriculum will mostly be populated by 19th and 20th century theological texts, and maybe some of those confessions kind of scattered in there. What would your students kind of get or expect from kind of diving into more 16th and 17th century Protestant works that they might not encounter in the same way in the kind of the later period?
Yeah, I mean, if you take my history of Presbyterianism class, you will get 19th and 20th century, Presbyterianism, right? But for most of my classes, of course, they do deal with that early modern world. And we're just going to ignore 19th and 20th century writings, right? So you will. One of the things I appreciate, especially about the Davenant Institute, is how, or in Davenant Hall, is how open, willing, and affirming you are relative to using primary source text material over secondary sources, right? And so so in my upcoming Baxter course, we will not read a single secondary source. We will only be reading Baxter and perhaps those writing around Baxter's time to help us contextualize him, but we're not allowing a 20th century historian to contextualize that period. We're just going to allow someone else perhaps. But anyways, all that to say is that we can say you took a Baxter class, and what you did in that class is you read Baxter, not people writing about Baxter. I mean, if I might tell a story, you could cut this out if you think it's too scandalous, but PhD program at a seminary, not a seminary that I went to, had a class on a particular well-known medieval theologian, PhD seminar, and the required reading was all secondary literature on that, the whole thing. Whereas I took the same course, PhD seminar, on the same person in the medieval period, and all I had to do was read that individual, right? So anyways, two different models of approaching the study of something. We want to be as close to that thing as possible, right? So inevitably, certain courses allow for that a lot better than others. Like History of American Presbyterianism was a mixture of secondary and primary literature. That was inevitably what it had to be, right? Because I wanted people to get a broad survey, and there's just good books that give you a kind of broad survey, right? But at the end of the day, we want to emphasize primary sources as much as possible. So,
right, we read the people in their own words.
Yeah.
Well, tell us more about the classes that you'll be teaching in the next 12 months.
Yeah. So I'm teaching with Time and Klein. We are co-teaching a course on Richard Baxter's political theology, which is popularly, or ought to be popularly titled, Richard Baxter's Christian Nationalism, because that's really what he wrote a whole book basically laying out what a holy Christian nation should look like. So we will read that, right? Like what a nation, Christian nation should look like. That's his holy commonwealth, in a whole bunch of aphorisms, like 400 or something ridiculous. So anyways, that's what we're doing for that course. We won't just be reading that book, but that will be kind of like at the center of everything else, I think. Then I'm going to be teaching a course on the Westminster Confession of Faith, particularly its theology. I often think that people don't appreciate why some of the language is in that confession. Like, why are they saying certain things? And so my whole goal there is to be like, this is why they're saying this here, because there was this debate either with the Lutherans or the Roman Catholics or fellow Reformed folk, and they're saying it in this way because they're like basically throwing in their hat, or alternatively, as they are wont to do on occasion, they say things in certain ways to leave open areas of disagreement, right? So they just kind of like are intentionally vague, right? And so my goal there is to look at the Westminster Confession of Faith, go through as much as we can. I'll probably have to pick and choose because we just probably won't be able to, it's long. We probably won't be able to do everything, but anyways, my goal is to contextualize the Westminster Confession of Faith, particularly theologically, not unlike what John Fesco somewhat tries to do in his book, although again, he's picking and choosing, and I might have some differences of opinion on some of that stuff. Anyways, he has a book called The Theology of the Westminster Standards or something like that. So anyways, that's the book I'm thinking of. But I want to do something like that. What else? I'm going to be teaching a course at some point on debates in Reformed theology. So each week, what we do is we pick one intro Reformed debate and we go and tackle it. So Sabbatarianism one week, right? Regulative principle stuff next week, right? Second commandment issues one week. Whatever. Anyways, there's like hundreds of them, right? These are the sorts of things that people at Reformed seminaries debate, during their free time around a beer. All right. So anyways, those are the sorts of things that so what I would do, my goal is to have like an argument on each side that we read from kind of Reformed literature, whoever, you pick a good representative arguing for this position, then you get, so like if you're doing regulative principle, you might read D.G. Hart on the one side and John Frame on the other, right? Or whatever. And you read them and then you talk about it. Oh, 2 office, 3 office, right? That's a big one, right? Elders, ministers, or ruling teaching elder stuff, right? Again, take 2 representatives and go at it. Spirituality of the church and transformationalism or neo-Calvinism, right? Or something. Anyways, there's 1,000 different things and I haven't decided. I want to take the 10 hot topics, right? So, David Van Druden and Brad Littlejohn on 2 kingdoms, whatever, right? So anyways, that's the plan, is you take like 50 pages from each person and then you just talk about it and read them and think about it and, right, see what the issues are. Where is the actual disagreement, the state of the question? Where do they agree? Where do they disagree? Do some irenicism. And then at the end of the day, put your foot down somewhere. Yeah.
Well, these sound like fascinating and relevant and maybe slightly spicy courses that you're going to be teaching.
Spicy is the only way that I want my courses to be, right? That's the only way.
Yeah, we like our theology like we like our pasta.
Yeah, indeed.
Not spicy.
Yeah, indeed.
So are there any either recent or upcoming publications that we can be on the lookout for?
Well, I am at the end of the line. I have 8 days to turn in my editorial introduction to what I hope to be is the first volume in a series of the full works of John Davenant. However, in this instance, it's his volume relating to his writings on the death of Christ. So everything he's written on the death of Christ, we're publishing in one volume, including a never translated before letter of his that he wrote to Hermann Hildebrand, a German theologian, minister theologian. Anyways, that should be coming out, I'm told, sometime spring 2024. The manuscript's already in, the translations of everything. It's all in, right? It's all been, so it's in the editorial process right now. But that editorial introduction is due in 8 days, August 15th. So that's coming out. I think that's the only. I have some reviews that I'm publishing in various places, including with Ad Fontes, a review of Richard Cross's book, Metaphysics and Christology in the 17th Century. So I have to send that to someone, perhaps you. I have no idea. Anyways, but someone hasn't bothered me for it yet. And so I haven't turned it in. I've been still kind of writing the review. So when I get bothered by it, I'll tell them at the end of the week, I'll send it to them and I'll finish it up. So, anyways.
There you go. Well, we'll be on the lookout for that John Davenant volume coming out.
Yeah.
It's very exciting.
Should be amazing. Yeah, it should be beautiful, hardcover, footnoted, modern footnotes. Like Davenant has never been published in this way. So retypeset, it's a retranslation of the 19th century translators translation, right? Not a full retranslation, more like a heavy edit of it. Yeah. So
very good. Very good. Well, as we kind of close out, can you share with our listeners a little bit of why you think people need to consider taking classes at Davenant Hall and maybe even enrolling in one of our degree programs? What is it that Davenant Hall is doing that people need to know about?
It's relatively cheap, it seems to me, at least compared to some seminaries in the Philadelphia area that I'm familiar with. No, not to name names, of course. And it's certainly cheaper than any schools in California, because California is not cheap. So, and again, not to name names. Yeah. The degree programs, as far as I understand it, it's a great deal. If you do it, then you go on and do PhD work at a just kind of a standard PhD place and get your PhD there or something like that. There's some sort of situation where you can get it remitted, your tuition that you paid here. Unless I'm misunderstanding something.
No, yeah, you'll get your Davenant Hall tuition fully refunded if you go on to complete a PhD in a related field.
Dude, do you know how much money that would have saved me had I not done MDiv, had I done that, then went on to get my PhD at Calvin? Because Calvin paid me, then you would pay me, and I would have done a whole bunch of free school from master's level onwards. That would have been very great. Okay, so that's why you should do the degree. I think I've already hit on why you should take Davenant Hall classes. If you want to read with people that know the primary literature well enough, I'm just trying to be like, somewhat humble, right? Like with all of our, look at our degrees, look at what we do, look at what we work in, these sorts of things. But at the end of the day, we all know the sort of stuff that we're teaching pretty well. And to be just easy and fair, and you will read a heavy dose of primary source literature, and you'll be able to think with other like-minded individuals in an easy setting in which you can be drinking a beer in front of your computer, listening to me move my hands, wave my hands, and say John Davenant, 12 times in a class or whatever. So anyways.
That's the dream. Sit in front of your computer, drinking a beer, listening to Michael Lynch talking about John Davenant.
I don't know about that, but it has weirdly seemed to be some people's dream.
Well, listener, viewer, if that's you, if that's your dream, then you can visit Davenant Hall and learn more about our classes and degree programs. I'd particularly encourage you to check out Dr. Michael Lynch's courses coming up. The Richard Baxter Political Theology course with Time and Klein, that's in the fall. So sign up now. That one's going to be very popular.
Very based,
very relevant. Also, his Westminster Confession of Faith course coming up in the winter, and Debates and Reformed Theology after that. So be on the lookout for his courses. Dr. Michael Lynch, thank you so much for joining Davenant Hall Faculty Spotlight.
Thank you, Nathan.